Totally Unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here with you. Welcome back. Mark Taylor-Canfield. Let me get my cursor here going. There we go. Mark Taylor-Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark. Welcome back to the program. A reporter, blogger, Huffington Post, and all kinds of other cool places. You've got a story about the first day of legal pot in Washington State?
Yes, Tom. I'm writing about this at my blog at Daily Kos. The first legal pot retailers have finally opened this week in Washington State. So last year, the voters approved Initiative 502, which legalizes the recreational use of marijuana, and the Washington State Liquor Control Board was given the responsibility of regulating the production, processing, and sale of cannabis. But it's taken 8 months for the state agency to develop its licensing policies. But on July 8th, 24 pot retailers were given licenses to open business in Washington, and that's out of 334 licenses that will eventually be approved across the state. So in Seattle, the first pot retail business to open was called Cannabis City, a shop near downtown, and on Tuesday, hundreds of people lined up to buy legal marijuana, and media from all over the globe were on hand to document the event. And by the way, Tom, one of the first customers was our own city attorney in Seattle, Pete Holmes.
Really?
So
the guy who's a city attorney, he represents the city, or is he a prosecutor?
He is our city attorney.
So he represents the city in legal affairs. And
yes, he does.
And he was one of the first people to buy legal pot. That's so cool.
Yes, he's been very forward on this issue and many other progressive issues in the city. And although marijuana is still illegal on the federal level, the governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee, and also the governor of Colorado do maintain an open dialogue with U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder on this subject.
Good.
So marijuana retailers in Washington State are prohibited from doing business within 1,000 feet of any elementary or secondary school, playground, recreation center, child care center, public park, etc. And there's also a DUI law which regulates driving under the influence of cannabis. But in Washington State, it is now legal for individuals over the age of 21 to possess up to 1 ounce of pot. And unfortunately, though, unlicensed growing of the plant is still illegal.
Yeah.
But the state also maintains its medicinal marijuana program under a totally separate set of rules.
Right, where you can grow up to 15 plants, as I recall. So, Mark, how long did it take for that store to sell out their inventory?
I'm not sure how long it took to sell out, but I do know that people stood in line for many, many hours in the hot sun. I was lucky to get in quickly, but a lot of people were in line all day long.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was a very, very long line, and it was a big, big event.
Were they rationing? Were they limiting? I know the maximum amount that they can sell to an individual at a time is an ounce. Were they selling less than that, or were they selling full ounces?
They were trying to limit people up to, I think at that point, 4 grams, and that's just because there were so many people in line.
Which would be about 4/30ths of an ounce, so a little more than 1/10 of an ounce, if I'm remembering my high school, whatever you call it, measurements correctly.
Yes, although the Washington State Liquor Control Board states that it's currently impossible to say how much revenue will be raised by the state.
Mm-hmm.
Some estimates say that up to $2 billion could be generated in the first 5 years because there's a 25% excise tax on the production, processing, and retail sale of legal marijuana in Washington State.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, thanks a lot for the report, and you're blogging over at Daily Kos now, right?
Yes, I will be writing about this today, so stay tuned. The story is spreading across the country. This is a big issue that's got legs, Tom, so it's not going to go away.
Okay, Mark Taylor-Canfield. Thank you, Mark. Good, always good to hear from you. Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. Last week, our nation's highest court struck another blow to public unions. The case, Harris v. Quinn, arose from a group of healthcare workers, home healthcare workers, in Illinois who did not want to contribute so-called fair share fees to a public union. Regardless of the workers' membership status, the union was obligated to negotiate on their behalf and help negotiate substantial pay increases for these workers. However, the home-based aides argued that they were not truly public employees and that these fees were a violation of their First Amendment rights. Keeping with the court's history of ruling against workers, the conservative justices ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and drilled another nail into the coffin of public unions. Without these agency fees, public unions may have to charge higher dues to the rest of their members, and membership rates will likely decline. Although the Supreme Court claims to have issued a narrow ruling by reclassifying this type of worker as partial public employees, they strongly hinted that they will continue striking blows to public unions in future rulings. Regardless of this new classification, unions are forced to negotiate on behalf of all workers, including those who don't join the union. By allowing some workers to opt out of agency fees, the Supreme Court gives them a free ride. Thanks to the 5 right-wing members of the court, some workers will get all the benefits of a union without having to contribute to the cost of negotiation. This is yet another example of the conservative attack on workers and another case of justices going to great lengths to enact their political will. It's time to rein in the power of the Supreme Court and protect our shrinking right to bargain collectively. If we don't fight back, it's only a matter of time before unions disappear completely. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand basic math, but apparently lawmakers in Kansas still don't get it. 2 years ago, Governor Sam Brownback proposed the largest tax cut any state has ever enacted in one single year. Unsurprisingly, the loss of tax revenue has plunged Kansas deep into deficit. When he proposed the legislation, Governor Brownback predicted that the massive tax cuts would trigger an economic boom in Kansas. Unsurprisingly, by shrinking the size of their revenue, Governor Brownback damned his state to huge budget shortfalls, and even the rating agency Moody's has downgraded their debt. This ridiculous theory that cutting taxes will increase revenue is laughable on its face and has been debunked for decades. The fact is, people like Sam Brownback don't enact these policies to create economic growth. They don't care about that. They enact them to give rich people tax breaks and have an excuse to slash government spending, particularly on the middle class and the poor. It's time to elect people who work for all Americans and who enact policies that help those of us who are not billionaires. Walmart's war on workers is not unique to the United States. Back in 2004, the retail giant actually closed a store in Canada after workers there voted to join a union. The difference, however, is that the Canadian Supreme Court has some respect for that nation's labor laws. Last month, the Supreme Court of Canada found that Walmart violated employment law by closing their store without a valid reason. Although a company spokesperson said that they did not close the location to retaliate against workers, Canada's High Court didn't buy it. The retailer will likely have to pay restitution to the 190 workers laid off from that location, which could include payments for damages and interest. Even if it's in another country, it's nice to see Walmart being held accountable for some of their anti-worker tactics. Last week, Tennessee's newest law took effect, and anyone who needs welfare in that state may now be subject to a drug test. Apparently, right-wing lawmakers in that state weren't satisfied with denying health care to the poor, so now they're also going to treat the needy like common criminals. Similar programs have been attempted in other red states, and not a single one has been shown to be effective. Not only do poor people use drugs at lower rates than the general population, but these programs, drug testing programs, have ended up costing taxpayers much more money than they claimed they would save. In addition, a similar law in Florida was actually struck down by a federal appeals court, and it's likely that this law will be challenged as unconstitutional as well. Drug testing of welfare recipients is simply another way to demonize the poor, and a way to make it even harder for those in need to get a little help. Bad enough that Tennessee Republicans refuse to expand health care to those in need. It's flat out disgusting that they think poverty should be treated like a crime. And finally, college students are fighting to protect their right to vote. Students from North Carolina State University are joining a lawsuit challenging a recent voting law in that state. The law made it mandatory that voters present a photo ID to vote. However, the legislation excluded student ID as an acceptable form of identification. The lawsuit claims that the new law is a violation of the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18. That amendment also states that the right to vote, quote, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of age. By excluding a form of identification primarily used by younger voters, North Carolina's law essentially blocks that age group from voting. Over the last few years, Republican lawmakers in several states have enacted measures to make it harder for young people to vote. They know that young people are more likely to support progressive ideas, and so Republicans want to keep them out of the voting booth. Thankfully, college students are not about to give up their right to vote so easily, and they'll only inspire more young people to fight back in other states. And that's the way it is for the week of July 7th, 2014. I'm Thom Hartmann on the Economic and Labor News.
listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting on commercial radio stations from coast to coast, on Sirius XM all across the North American continent, on Pacifica stations across America, Europe, and Africa, on American Forces Radio on every U.S. military base in the world, and simulcast as television on both Dish Network, DirecTV, and other cable systems nationwide by the Free Speech TV network, plus on the Progressive Voices app on the TuneIn Radio app. Excuse me. And is Senator Sanders with us? He's not in the chair yet. Okay, we're gonna Bernie. We're gonna do brunch with Bernie a day early, and we're waiting for him to. Oh, he's just sitting down right now. Great. Bernie will be with us in just a moment, and we will we'll be taking your calls for Senator Sanders today. We're going to do our national town hall meeting a day early. Senator Sanders is going to be on the road tomorrow, so we will be talking with him today. And he's getting wired up right now. Okay, it'll be just a moment. Later on in the program, Shahid Buttar is going to. I think he's going to be in the studio. He might even drop by. Yeah, he's going to be physically here. He's the executive director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. He'll be with us in our second hour. And Reverend Bill Keller, always good for a lively debate, will be with us in the third hour. And Senator Sanders is available?
Yep, right here, Tom.
Hey, Senator Sanders. Great.
Good.
Thanks.
How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for joining us. So what's going on in your world, in the Senate and in our country?
These are tough times. They are tough times because the country faces almost unprecedented problems, and we have a political party, a major political party, which is determined to do nothing except obstruct, and it becomes very, very distressing. I'm just reading a little bit more about climate change and the fact that the scientific community is virtually unanimous about climate change being caused by human activity, the devastating impacts we're already seeing in terms of drought and floods and forest fires and oceans that are getting warmer and depleted fish stock, and the migration of people fighting for limited resources. It is a huge problem, and not only are we not addressing the problem, we have a major political party which is rejecting basic science, and that is really, really scary, because I don't know that a modern society, a great nation, survives if basic science is rejected. So that's concern. In terms of science and how we function as a society, that is very distressing. Now we're looking at another issue, is that the Highway Trust Fund right now is going broke. And that has to do with the fact that we just don't have enough revenue coming in. And at a time when our infrastructure, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, needs $3 trillion of investment. $3 trillion just to bring us up to a reasonable place. And that means dealing with our roads and our bridges, our water plants, wastewater plants, our rail, our aging schools. We can't get a bill passed. We can't get a bill passed, and that fund is now going broke, which means that hundreds and hundreds of construction projects around the country which depend on this federal funding will not take place, and it could cost us, if you can believe it, some 700,000 jobs at exactly the time when we need decent paying jobs. We're fighting right now and continuing the effort to raise the minimum wage. I think almost everybody in America, regardless of political persuasion, understands that $7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage, is a starvation wage. We've got to raise that wage. It is, in terms of inflation, far lower than it used to be. And what we're struggling with now is not only trying to raise the minimum wage, but deal with folks in the Republican Party who want to abolish the concept of the minimum wage, who think that it is undue government restriction to say there should be at least a floor on what employers can pay in the United States. And they would take us back to the time when people are paid pennies an hour. So if you're in a high unemployment area, you can be paid $3-4 an hour, and that is to some of my right-wing Republican colleagues what freedom is about. So we have a myriad of very, very serious problems, and a lot of it relates to campaign financing as a result of this disastrous Citizens United decision. Big money interests are now able to spend as much as they want on the political process, and billionaires like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and others are prepared to do just that. Meanwhile, we have an election coming up in a few months, and the pundits tell us, Tom, that something like 60% of the American people are not going to vote. So the dynamic of contemporary American politics is that billionaires can spend hundreds of millions of dollars in support of right-wing candidates who will make the rich even richer, and yet working people and low-income people are so disgusted with what's going on right now, they're not even voting. So you're having a situation where not only will 60% of the people not vote, if you're lower income, if you're young, we're looking at numbers like 70 or 80% of the people. So what kind of democracy do you have when billionaires buy election and the vast majority of the people no longer even vote?
It's a disaster.
You know? Yeah, it is. And we have got to, it is not easy stuff. Believe me, it is a lot easier to talk about it than to do something about it. But what we have got to do is take on the establishment, take on the corporate media, and just convey to people what democracy is about and how important the political process is. And it just breaks my heart to hear from young people especially, but from a whole lot of people saying, oh, politics, you know, it's all crap, they're all thieves, they're all crooks, they're all bums, I'm not getting involved. Yeah, well, if you're not going to get involved and change the system, if you're not going to get involved and take on the big money interests, if you're not going to get involved, well, I will tell you that the middle class will continue to decline, poverty will continue to increase, the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else will continue to grow wider. Your job is going to continue to go to China. We're not going to address the enormous planetary crisis of climate change. On the other hand, what we should understand is that change is possible. It can happen. And, you know, one of the very positive things, and we sometimes take it for granted, Tom, is how quickly change comes about when people demand that change. This country has gone a long, long way in terms of overcoming racism. We know that racism still exists. But I think if you and I were talking 20, 30 years ago, we never would have believed there'd be an African-American elected president and reelected. That is a sea change in public consciousness regarding race that we as a nation should be very proud of. The same thing regarding women's rights. I remember when I was mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont, and we appointed the first woman police officer. It was just a huge revolutionary deal. And now you see in every field of life, you know, women participating fully. 20 years ago, I think there was one woman senator. Today there are 19, and that number is only going to go up. Governors, congresspeople. We have made huge progress in opening up all walks of life to women. And I think a lot of young people don't even understand the efforts that so many people made in that struggle. In terms of disability rights, you can remember when we were younger, people who had disabilities were put away in institutions. That's changed. Gay rights has changed. Change can happen, but it doesn't happen unless people are involved in the process.
So very well said. Senator Bernie Sanders is with us. He'll be taking your calls right after this break. The rest of the hour, it'll be our national town hall meeting, Brunch with Bernie, here on the Thom Hartmann program. So, and I see the calls are queuing up, so we'll get to you in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann program.
By the way, NPR did a great piece on Bernie this morning. There's a link to it over at democraticulnderground.com, and we'll put one up on our website as well. And welcome back. Gant, watching Free Speech TV on the DirecTV satellite system. You are in Thompson Station, Tennessee. You are on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hello?
Gant, you are on the air.
Oh, hi. Senator, it's a pleasure to speak to you. I have a question about the Republican and their agendas. Based on what I'm hearing from you, you're on the halls of the Capitol every day. Is it true that the conservative end of things are deliberately thwarting all of these efforts? I mean, just as a deliberately against Obama? And if so, what is their overall objective to completely thwart all of these budgets, all of these ideas that the president's trying to do, everything that the moderates to the liberals are trying to do? Why are they doing this? And what is the method to their madness, I guess, is my question, because it doesn't really seem to make sense. They're absolutely killing our country.
Well, Gant, there is a method to their madness, and I think it is no great secret that Republicans met literally just at the time when Obama was inaugurated the first time, and they said our strategy has got to be obstructionism to make sure that as little as possible happens, and then when the economy tanks and problems occur, we blame it on the president, because most people don't understand or are following what is going on. So what you have had in the Senate is a record number of filibusters, and by that I mean not just people getting to the floor and speaking for a long period of time. That's part of Senate tradition. That's always gone on. But what you're seeing now is the demand for 60 votes on virtually every issue. There was a time when, this surprises many Americans. They think, well, a majority wins in the Senate. It doesn't. You need now on virtually every single piece of legislation, significant or minor, 60 votes. That used to be the exception to the rule. Now it is the rule. And that means that the Republicans can defeat almost everything. And that is unprecedented, that level of obstructionism. So we are now a dysfunctional institution where virtually nothing is getting done, despite the fact that we have huge, huge problems. And what the Republicans believe, and it may in fact end up working the way they hope, is that if Congress doesn't act, if problems are not addressed, people will blame the president. Most people in this country don't know which party controls the House and controls the Senate. They don't know those things. So they will blame President Obama. They will forget what Bush did, and they will blame President Obama. So that is the method in their madness, but I'm not so sure it is a terrible, terrible approach if you're concerned about the future of America, if you're concerned about the middle class, if you're concerned about the elderly or the kids. But in fact, from a political point of view, it may not be so crazy.
Yeah, we just have 10 seconds till the break here, Senator.
The antidote to all of this stuff is, Tom, is we need people to be thinking about politics and government in a way they never have.
Getting politically active, movement politics.
Yes, absolutely.
And showing up to not just to vote, but even to run for office. Senator Bernie Sanders is with us. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in our Brunch with Bernie segment here on the Thom Hartmann program. Check out his website, sanders.senate.gov.